I've just finished Klara in the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This was a book that I previously had known nothing about, although I'm somewhat familiar with the author. I had read one book by him before, Remains of the Day. I'll talk about that more in maybe just a second. But I hadn't been keeping up with his work. I knew nothing about this book. If left to my own devices, I would not have read it, except we started up a new book club here at work, and this was the book that was selected. It was somebody else's choice. I knew nothing about it, but I wanted to participate in the book club, so I said, yeah, sign me up for a copy. Somebody ordered some copies and distributed around the office. And I got this book in my hands on, I believe, Monday. And got through the first 30 pages pretty quickly. I found that the prose flowed. It was very easy to read, even though I was a little bit, well, I didn't know anything about the book. So I was a little bit skeptical. Where's this going to go? Is this going to be any good? And then once I started getting into it, I found it more and more addictive. Now, this is a book that you want to read spoiler free because there's a number of plot twists and there's also a number of gradual reveals. So there's a lot of things about the world of this book which are not told to you at the beginning, which are only hinted at. And gradually you see the puzzle pieces starting to come together, and gradually you kind of get a fuller picture of what's going on. And it's somewhat interesting, intriguing, seeing those puzzle pieces come together. It definitely held my interest. And there's also a number of different plot threads which are being developed, and again, you really don't know everything that's going on. So, at a certain point, maybe about the halfway point in this book, I just said to myself, I got to find out how it ends. And so then I just finished it off in the next couple days. So I finished this book, all 300 pages of it, in about 5 days, which is good for me. If you watch this channel, you know I typically take several weeks to finish a book. But this one, it was one of those books that after a certain point, I just couldn't put it down. I just had to know. And then I got to the end, and you get that resolution, and you get all of the puzzle pieces coming together, and then you're like, okay, now that I know where this is headed, now that I know what all the pieces meant, was it worth all the investment I put into it? What was it worth the emotional investment for that payoff? And I think, I don't know, maybe it's I'm not quite sure once I'm all done with it that I'm so impressed with the ending and where it all went. But in terms of the reading experience itself, like actual being engrossed in it and turning the pages, I think I'd give it maybe a 10 out of 10 for the reading experience. Um, yeah. Whether it's looking back on the whole thing, if it's if the story itself is really all that remarkable, maybe I'd have to think about that one for a little bit. So, obviously, that all being said, I think if you haven't read this book yet, just go ahead and stop the video now. Go get a copy, read the book, and don't read any reviews. Don't read any spoilers. It's a book that the less you know about it, the better when you go into it. I'm going to do my usual thing, which is talk through a bunch of stuff, and by the end of this video, I'll probably have spoiled several of the major plot points. So just go ahead and be forewarned about that. So I'm maybe I should start with one detail that maybe I should have put before that spoiler break. Sorry. The author Kazuo Ishiguro is Japanese, but he's been living in England since he was 5 years old. So he is, for all intents and purposes, a British author. I mean, he's got Japanese blood in his veins, but he is thoroughly British. I mentioned that because it came up a couple times in the discussion about this book club. But one of my coworkers, I asked him if he was joining the book club, and he said, "No, I don't really like Japanese authors." And I said, "No, he's got a Japanese name, but he's not a Japanese author." So I don't know. Maybe it's helpful to point that out for some people, or if that matters. Japanese name, British author. The other book of his that I had previously read was Remains of the Day. Now, Remains of the Day, actually, it was there was that 1993 movie, which was quite popular at the time, although I think it's been somewhat forgotten about since then. I don't know. Let me know. Do people still talk about that movie? I get the sense it's kind of completely forgotten about. But for when it came out, it was well received, and for a couple of years afterwards, people were talking about it. In fact, because I went to college in the 90s, I remember one of my political science professors talking about that movie and talking about how the movie was a good portrayal of how fascism was. There was people sympathetic to fascism in the upper classes of Britain in the 1930s. You know, before the war had broken out between England and Hitler. And the professor mentioned that movie as a good example of that, which got my interest in it because from the previews of that movie, I would never have guessed that there was a political historical element to it. I just thought it was some drama about, you know, like a British upper class family and the butler, something boring like that. And then that was one of the reasons I was interested in picking up the book. And I mention all this because if you've read this book, you know that some of the very similar themes about fascism and sympathy to fascism pop up near the end of the book. So maybe it's worth highlighting that connection. I read Remains of the Day in 2006. Still haven't seen the movie, actually, but did read the novel in 2006. And looking back at the review I wrote up about it at the time, which I have in my book blog, which I'll leave a link to in the description down below if anyone's interested. Looking at the review I wrote up at the time, I was all praise for the book. I said, oh, what a wonderful book, so well written, had a lot of really funny moments, had a lot of really heartbreaking moments. So I really enjoyed it. I guess I really enjoyed reading it at the time. It's interesting, though, because my memory of it now is that it was maybe a little bit emotionally manipulative. Like there's this heartbreaking scene at the end, which really got me at the time I was reading it, although I look back and I think, maybe that was a little bit cheesy, that scene. Maybe it was a little bit manipulative, getting the characters into that position. I don't know. I don't... Maybe this is just my own personal bias. I tend to get... I'm an easy target for sad books. I get overly emotional very quickly, but I also tend to resent the books for making me feel that way. Okay, so I mentioned that because I think maybe both of those themes could possibly apply to this book, Klara and the Sun. Certainly, as I said before, the fascism element comes in maybe the last quarter of the book. It took me a little off guard when that came in. I was not expecting the book to zig in that direction. But we find out that a couple of the characters are either openly fascist or have maybe quasi-fascist sympathies, even if they're reluctant to accept that label. The book, by the way, takes place in a kind of an undefined time period, but sometime in the future of America, in which things are largely the same as they are now, but there are just a couple differences. One we're introduced to right away at the beginning of the book, which is the AFs, or the artificial friends, which are artificial intelligent robots who are bought as companions to children to kind of be their friend and companion. The other one, the other one I guess would be a spoiler, because it's something that's teased and then gradually revealed as the book goes on, what that is. But I guess since I'm spoiling everything anyways, I'll say it's the genetic manipulation of children to make them more gifted, or lifted, as it's called here. So these elements individually have been done before. So the idea of some of the offspring being genetically manipulated, and some of the children not being genetically manipulated, and then the gap that arises between them has been done before. And I should have looked this up before I turned play on the video. What is the name of that movie? There's a movie that came out in the 90s that was about that premise. I'll look it up after I finish this video and put the title in the description down below. I think it's actually been done several times before. There's also the whole thing about artificial intelligence has been done to death by science fiction. I mean, Data in Star Trek, Isaac Asimov in the I, Robot series, the whole thing about, can a robot achieve feelings and consciousness and stuff like that. And then, since we're getting to spoilers, one of the things that's revealed halfway through is there's a plot to replace a dying girl with a replicated robot of herself, which again is something that's been done before. There was a Black Mirror episode about replacing dead people with AI that was made to resemble them. So the individual elements have all been done before. But as the saying goes, there's nothing new under the sun. I guess the question is, how well do they get pulled off? I mean, in terms of writing an engrossing story, very well. In terms of anything new that the book contributes to the philosophical conversation about any of these topics, maybe it's a little bit underwhelming on that score. So the android type characters, the AFs as they're known, or as artificial friends, inhabit maybe a trope which is common in science fiction. And to my mind, this is the principal logical problem of the book, which is they're incredibly naive. And I think this is a trope because I think a lot of science fiction does this. I mean, Data in Star Trek was like this. You remember Data from Star Trek, right? He was an android and he had all this information programmed into him because he was a computer and he could just be carrying all this information around with him. So he could tell you exactly how many light years it was away to the nearest star. It was all this stuff just stored in his database. And yet he couldn't understand the most basic things about human language and human interaction. He would get confused by idioms or colloquial phrases or irony or just all this stuff, which you think, well, okay, but why isn't that programmed in there? I mean, if he can speak the English language, then why doesn't he also understand idioms? Why can't idioms also be programmed in there? Why can't human psychology also be programmed in there? And perhaps this was maybe an artifact of the times that series took place, which was in the 90s. before we had Google Translate. Because Google Translate can, by and large, handle idioms quite easily. You just program idioms in there just like you do the rest of the lexis and vocabulary set. AI like ChatGPT can use idioms and can also, the artificial intelligence, I think, has progressed to a state now where maybe the thing about data is looking a little bit naive in retrospect. This book, which came out just a couple of years ago in 2021, I believe, has these incredibly sophisticated AIs, the artificial friends, and yet there's so much they don't understand. The principal plot point that revolves around Klara and the sun is Klara has a view of the sun similar to, maybe an ancient Babylonian or something, where she believes that the sun is some sort of sky deity that can be talked to, that gives life, that you can pray to. And she believes when she sees the sun goes down, when she sees the sun set every night, she believes that the sun is going into the house at the end of the field, because, that's what it looks like when she sees the sun set into the field. And like a childlike view of the world, or like a primitive person's view of the world. That is necessary for the plot of this book to revolve, but it also doesn't make sense, because why not just program that kind of stuff in to these artificial intelligences? Why not just say, give them some basic knowledge about astronomy and physics and the way the world works? So also the way she talks is a little bit stilted. She leaves out articles sometimes. She addresses people by their title instead of pronouns. For example, there's a manager at her store. She never calls him the manager or a manager, simply manager. It's it's a little bit cutesy, but no reason for it. ChatGPT, another artificial intelligence. I guess, to be fair, maybe ChatGPT came out 1 or 2 years after this book. But ChatGPT has no problem with pronouns or articles or anything like that. So that part of it doesn't seem to be entirely realistic. But you let it go. I forget who said this, but there's this saying that in each science fiction book, there's just something that the audience has to let go, and then the rest of the story should proceed logically from there. So this is the element that you let go, that these incredibly technological, sophisticated artificial intelligences have human intelligence, but a childlike naivete about the world, even though it should have been theoretic. You should have been able to program the more sophisticated knowledge into them. Okay. Sorry, I spent much longer making that point than that point was worth. Looking at the time stamp, the timer on this video. You'll have to forgive me. That's the problem with doing these things unscripted. Okay, so that being established, the beginning of this book, the artificial friends are waiting in the store to be sold, and Klara, who's the main character in this one, forms a bond with a girl named Josie, who comes to the window to see her. And Josie keeps saying, "We will come back and buy you. We will come back and buy you." But then Josie will be away for several days or weeks at a time. And during that time, there will be other customers who will come in and want to buy Klara. And as a reader, of course, you're starting to get worried. like, oh no, no, don't anyone buy her. Josie wants to be with Klara, and Klara wants to be with Josie, and if they get separated, that's going to be very sad. And I caught myself getting really worried about that as I was reading this book, and I thought, oh no, what are you doing? You're letting this author manipulate you again. Don't get sucked into the emotion. It's not real. None of it's real. It's just imaginary. It's just words on a page. But I couldn't help myself. He writes too well. He sucks you in. Even though I resented, I don't know. It's for whatever reason. For whatever reason, we humans just get suckered into feeling emotional about this kind of stuff. Even though, if you look at the scale of the world's tragedies, it's not the worst thing you can imagine. But I don't know, there's a certain sentimental part of us that gets very emotional about a child and a favorite pet, or a child and a favorite toy. There are numerous stories or movies that have worked that little emotional hook. And I don't know, maybe something innocent about it that gets us. And I was hooked, even though I was like, I don't want to feel emotional about this, but you got me. But then once Klara and Josie does show up and buy Klara, and Klara and Josie are living together, then some of the other pieces start falling in, and we get little hints that maybe not all is as it should be, and this is where the book slows down a little bit. Well, actually, I shouldn't say slows down. It was never really moving at that fast of a pace. But I got really hooked on the mystery of it. I wanted to find out what was going on, how was this going to resolve itself, and somewhat frustrated that the book was moving through a slow pace. The fact that it's all narrated from the AI's perspective, the artificial friend's perspective, allows for some of this mystery to be preserved, because the artificial friend is a childlike naivete. It's similar to what are some of those other books? There's the incident at Three Dog. I don't remember the name of the book. Sorry, I'll look it up and leave the title in the description below. Maybe like To Kill a Mockingbird, right? Where there's an adult world, but it's being narrated through the eyes of a child who's able to pick up on some stuff, but the reader is able to pick up on more than she's able to pick up on. So that's interesting. But it does also mean that we spend maybe needless amounts of time where the robot is just figuring things out that the human reader has figured out a long time ago, or is narrating stuff that the human reader doesn't need spelled out for them. And so that also contributed to the book going a little bit slow. But I like I said, once I got hooked, I was just hooked. I wanted to keep turning the pages to see what happened. The ending is interesting. I mean, once you get to a certain point in the book, you realize that there are maybe only two possible endings on this, or two obvious endings. One is that the girl doesn't get better, and yeah, by the way, I'm heavily into spoiler territory here. The girl doesn't get better, and we find out that the robot's superstition, the robot learns a lesson about their superstition, and that it's not a magical world, it's a cold, hard, real world. And the other one would have been to infuse us with a bit of a supernatural, and see that the robot, having prayed to the sun, actually somehow magically does seem to make some difference somehow. And they went with the second option here, which is, if I'm being perfectly honest, it was kind of the ending I was hoping for as I was reading it. I really wanted that happy, warm ending as I was invested in it. But now that I'm at the end, I'm like, okay, I guess that's the ending I wanted, but why? Why did that happen? What kind of world are we living in? Could we go back and clarify this? I mean, did that robot have a special connection to the sun? Is the sun a deity in the world of this novel? Yeah. And I know at this point, I guess I'm only talking to people who have finished the book. So if maybe none of this will make sense if you haven't read the book, but if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. There was also, and if you read the book, you'll know what I'm talking about, a sacrifice that the artificial intelligence character makes. And much is made of the sacrifice at the time, but then we never really see any ramifications from it. I mean, the artificial friend character, Klara, spends several pages pondering what her diminished abilities will be like now that she's made the sacrifice. And I guess we see some things of her perception being diminished, although it wasn't entirely clear to me. It seems like it just took longer for her to distinguish shapes now that she lost the ability. Well, maybe that was it. Maybe that was the diminished perception. It's just it took her longer to distinguish the shapes and the people. I don't know. I thought much was made of that sacrifice, but then it didn't seem to have any ramifications on anything. And I guess the other criticism I would have of this, I don't know if this is a criticism or not, but the whole book revolved around the reader's sympathy to the narrator, the artificial friend character. And I think some of that sympathy relied on the artificial friend character being a little bit cutesy. You know, she's described as being like a fashionable. I mean, she's a robot, but having the appearance of a fashionable, good-looking woman, but with a childlike simplicity. Her speech patterns are a little bit cutesy. I mean, if we had done the same story, but it had been like the robot character had been like, instead of a humanoid form in the form of a good-looking woman, it had just been like, you know, like a square on wheels, and had kind of more of a less cutesy dictation pattern, or sorry, not dictation, diction, less cutesy speech patterns. I guess the emotional investment would have been less. But maybe that's not a criticism. Maybe that's just the way you tell the story, the way you get the reader invested in the story. Okay, having mentioned all those criticisms, let me come back to the stuff I liked about this book. The prose style was very easy to read. It just flowed effortlessly. It kept you turning the pages. There were a number of scenes, maybe 3 or 4 of them, where there were characters talking. There were several characters talking to each other. And I thought that those conversations were very well done in this book. So there's a few scenes where there's a number of different characters talking, and the flow of the conversation was good. The way one character would introduce something, and then the other characters would kind of ignore it and go away from it, and they talk about something different, and then it would come back again, and then the conversation would gradually change as this thing that was interjected just briefly inserted itself into the conversation more and more and became more dominant. The tension that these kind of things were creating in the conversation, I thought the conversation scenes with the humans talking to each other were very well done, a number of them, and I found those gripping and engrossing as I was reading it. So yeah, that's all to the positive. Some very well written individual scenes in this book, which for me, I think would be enough to firmly put this book in my recommend category, even if I'm not sure how I feel about the ending or whether it all amounted to much thematically in the end. Those well-written scenes are probably worth giving this book a recommendation. And I think I'll finish there. So yeah, if you've already read it, let me know what you thought about it. If you haven't read it, hopefully you're not watching yet. Yeah, hopefully you stop the video after the first 5 minutes. But I haven't spoiled everything. There's tons of stuff I've not mentioned. So if you did watch the video anyways, you can still read the book and I think enjoy most of it unspoiled.